Hey everyone, excited to introduce to you Kat Sandoval, who is a reporter at Newsy, and you're based in Chicago, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yes. Oh my God, I'm so excited to connect with you. Definitely very passionate about a lot of D&I stuff and working at LinkedIn. I think helped me kind of expose me to a lot of other. We had a lot of employee resource groups with women at LinkedIn, the Black Inclusion Group, the Hispanics at LinkedIn, and all these other groups. So it definitely opened up my eyes to explore beyond just the Asian experience. So really excited to chat with you and learn from you.
I'm excited to see you too and to, I don't know, talk about my experience.
Yes. Yeah, and I know you do this for a living, so no pressure at all, right? For for me. But no, I appreciate this is episode 131. So this has definitely been a really strong passion project of mine. And I've learned so much from this experience. And I'm very grateful for Landmark. I think Landmark was one of the reasons why I really started committing to this instead of doing it like, once every few months. It helped me really just be committed to sharing stories and being able to educate others about different cultures and different experiences. Yeah, well, I'm excited. So I know Josh connected us, and you guys are like family. I heard you guys are all really close. So I'm very grateful to have met your family, some of your family members as well. So that's really cool. And yeah, Josh is a powerhouse, honestly. Like he's the game in the world of, for those who are listening who aren't familiar with Landmark, the person who introduced us, we're in the same leadership program. I think it's like Landmark Team Management and Leadership Program. And we're both pretty new. It's only been 7 weeks into the program, but it's been super insightful. And Josh is killing it. He's my pod leader, and he's just his accountability, his stand, just his level of listening and his presence is creating a lot of miracles. So just wanted to let you know.
I love that. I actually was a Game in the World accountable as well. And I know for the viewers or listeners who don't know what that means, that's essentially just getting your dreams to become a reality. And it could be scary, but at the same time, it's stepping into the world and taking those actionable steps to realize it. And I don't know, Landmark for me, team, that program just changed my life completely. I have no regrets. One of the hardest things I've ever done, but at the same time, so gratifying. The people on team, even ones I've yet to meet, we're going through or have gone through this rigorous program. And so, it just bonds you together no matter where in the world you are.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think anytime we go through quote unquote suffering or just a lot of hardship, it really connects us, right? Like I know anytime I meet other Vietnamese people who have similar parents that are refugees that escaping a war, whatever it is, like we get it, we understand each other. We have that, like, yeah, we know what it's like to, have saran wrap remote controls and like just all these little nuances. But yeah, I think there's a certain relatedness that, like, hey, these people are committed to life and these people are committed to making a difference. And that's a powerful relatedness. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I've heard that you've also like created your own, like what you do now for a living, right, through the project. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you want me to talk about it or
Yeah, I think that'd
I
be
don't know.
great. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It's
Yeah, great.
inspiring.
Well, I knew I've always wanted to be a reporter. That was always a passion of mine, telling API stories. I just felt like there wasn't necessarily a lot of representation. And so getting into this business is so competitive. I started out, as a college student in Indiana, moving to New York City, the number one spot to do journalism. And it was very difficult. I applied to 100, I kid you not, and I counted this, 100 reporting jobs straight out of college. I
Wow.
got rejected most of the time, like almost all the time. I think I got accepted to one place where it's so far out, I don't even remember where it was, and one in Brooklyn who wanted to take a chance on me. So all that to say, it was still really hard because I was freelancing. And so that meant, you know, trying to make things work, and companies wouldn't hire me because I didn't have enough experience, because I was just a fresh graduate. And at the same time, they wanted that experience and I wanted that experience. But in order to get that experience, I needed that first job, but it was just very competitive. All that to say, I was doing other jobs aside from reporting. You know, I was working office jobs. I started shooting, doing some commercial work, producing, doing short films, but it wasn't what I wanted to do, which was report full-time and get paid for it. And through the team management and leadership program through Landmark, it was actually voicing it. I think saying the words, I want to be a reporter, was scary. Saying the words, I want to be an on-camera reporter, just terrified me. Although that was in my heart, the secret dream that I've always wanted to do. And then when I finally got the courage from team to admit that, and then started, you know, taking small step actions to make that work, and to have the courage to admit, first of all, that that's what I wanted to do, kind of led to all these openings and opportunities. And I have to say, you know, I Landmark was definitely something that helped me come out of my my fear, and, you know, helped me admit what I wanted to do. But I have to say, there's still a lot of actions that I needed to take to get to where I am today. A lot of doors that opened and a lot of doors that closed. You know, I ended up like broke in New York and had to live back home. And eventually, you know, after doing a lot of stints of freelancing, found and was lucky enough to get a job in Chicago as a reporter in Chicago. And now I'm doing what I love. I get to tell people stories, represent, get Asian Americans on television, because, you know, I feel as if there's not a lot of us out there, not a lot of us out there. And that is leading to a lot of racism, a lot of stereotypes, even self-hate within the community. And that's one of the reasons that I do what I do, because I feel like if there's that little girl or that little boy who just watches someone who looks like us or even listens to us, you know, they know that there's opportunities for them as well. They can do what I do or other things. But in order for that to happen, in order for us to kind of break that mold, I feel like we need to show up. And there are a lot of things, unfortunately, even in my industry, that work against us in regards to representation.
Wow, yeah, that's powerful. You're right. Like Filipino presence as well, like I feel like is even less, right? Like I do see a lot of Chinese, and you know, I think Koreans are starting to get a lot more visibility in media. Of course, not as much as many other, but yeah. And I honestly, like, you're probably the only Filipino person I know in media in general, right? It's very rare, you know. Yeah, that's beautiful, and that all. And thanks for sharing. 100, yeah, that's not easy. Getting rejected that many times, like it's gotta affect you, you know, a lot, right?
Definitely it did. But I think what inspired me was I read somewhere that Stephen King, that famous horror author, what he did was he took a nail, banged it in the wall, and started sending out, you know, his writings. Every time he got a rejection, he would put it in that through that nail, and it started like stacking up, but it didn't stop him. It just gave him more momentum to keep trying. And I think for me, yes, it was tough. Yes, you know, I'm the first journalist in my family. My dad's a physician, my mom's a nurse. They wanted me to get into the medical field. There's a lot of Filipinos in the medical field, particularly as nurses or doctors. And
Right.
so being in the field, in this field in the first place, was just going against the grain.
Yeah.
For me, in my family, even, you know, when I'm out with some of my Filipino friends. But I think I don't know where I was going with that, other than, you know, just sometimes you just have to do what you feel your heart is calling you to do, whatever that may look like. And if there isn't, to me anyway, even if there isn't someone you could see on the other end, like a family member who's doing what you want to do, you know, there are other people who are, you know, there are tons of Filipino, as I'm in this business, there are tons of Filipino journalists, Elaine
Ah, okay.
Quijano, who's one as well. You know, there's, but I mean, there could certainly be more. I'm saying tons, but to me, I feel like there could be more. There could be more Asian American journalists as well. You
Mm.
know, because the more representation we have in the newsrooms, the more stories we have coming out. And there's something I do want to share, and I've already asked my little brother this to make sure he was okay that I share this story. But so I'm an immigrant kid, meaning I was born in the Philippines, moved from the Philippines when I was 10. I have 3 younger brothers. Our youngest moved here when he was 4. So he didn't know a lot about Filipino culture growing up in the Philippines as much as a 10-year-old like me would.
Yeah.
But what I found interesting was when he was growing up, you know, in grade school, he just didn't understand what it means to be Asian American. So he looked different. And so I remember him in the kitchen table with my mom and him yelling at the top of his lungs, crying, saying, why can't I be white like everyone else?
Wow.
Why am I Asian, right? Like, why did you make me like this? Like blaming my mom for creating him the way he
Yeah.
is. She had a choice.
Huh.
And I realized that was because, you know, in the school we were in Jersey, there weren't a lot of Filipinos. And so he very much felt alone. There wasn't also at that time a lot of people he sees on television. And meanwhile, for me, like I knew what it was like to grow up with people who looked like you. So I didn't question my identity as much as he did or challenged it. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that he grew up in America and I thought he was more American than any of us, yet he hated who he was because of the streaming, either the media, you know, the surroundings that he had. And to me, taking that experience and then going to college in a mostly white population made me realize how identity really shapes us and how important it is to just get to know our roots and be proud of who we are. I know this probably sounds a little odd, but you know, my brother Roman, who I don't know if you've interviewed him or not, he eventually learned to love himself, right? And to me, as a big sister, it was more of a protection thing. Like if he was experiencing the same, how many other younger kids, and now that I have nieces, how many of them will experience this self-hate from our society? And so if it's our job to kind of make this world a little bit better, perhaps, you know, we can start by getting more of that story, more of us, like more of what you do out there, so kids know that they're not alone, you know. And I think that's the most important part, because we will pass that. I would hate to pass down that self-hate when our culture and who we are and our identity is such a beautiful thing.
Yeah, wow, there's a lot you just shared there. I can certainly relate. I think growing up, like I think a lot of Asian men feel very insecure about our masculinity, and I even wrote a book about it. But yeah, essentially, I think if you talk to most Asian guys, like they feel very unattractive. We're afraid to even approach women in general. Like there's just a lot of representation of us just being like bullied, or so people relate to us as like the nerds, right? So it's really sad like growing up, right? Because I talk to a lot of Asian guys, and I meet people through Landmark and other coaching programs, and everyone says the same thing. They're like, yeah, I wouldn't even dare talk to a white girl. Like I just feel I'm like afraid, like they're just gonna think that, we're not masculine enough and we can't satisfy them or whatever. And it really is, it's just sad to see that that's like the identity. And I think it's starting to shift, like the last couple years. But yeah, it's sad, right? Because you have like thousands, like millions of people that feel this way and no one ever talks about it. So I can certainly relate, like just growing up, like I was afraid to date a lot of women, and I think I'm not alone. um but yeah, and it's interesting. My mom, even like growing up, it's like they would say things like, yes, you can, like you should date like a white girl or something like that, right? It's like
That
very, it's
does
crazy, right? Like,
does a specific that ethnicity really or that
yeah,
race?
they were that specific. They were like, yes, we would only want you to like date, like, well, they were like, either like Asians or like white people. Like, and I think, the older generation, I think there's a lot of media that, so it's sad, but they would never allow you to date like black people, right? I mean, that like growing up, like I wasn't the only family where I've heard things like that, and it's just a shame to kind of reflect on, like that's just what was told when you're young.
Got it. Yeah, I actually dated my first boyfriend was a Jamaican, well, whatever. But my first my ex was Jamaican American, and I thought it was interesting how we kind of blended that culture together. It was it was fascinating in terms of when we'd walk down the street, the looks I get from, Black Americans sometimes, white Americans sometimes, or even my own people, right? I think
Mhm.
there's just a lot of that, especially in New York City. I remember this, oh my gosh, this was insane. I don't even yeah, in Brooklyn of all places.
Wow.
I was holding hands with him. I was stopped by this Black woman who didn't even bother looking at me. She just looked at my boyfriend at that time and said, "Why are you with this white girl and not with your own people?" And my mouth was just, it dropped because I couldn't understand why she looked at me and saw me as a white woman when clearly I'm a
Mm.
woman of color. But she felt as if I had taken one of their men away. And
Mhm.
the guy I was with at that time, was really sweet. He spoke back and said, "I'm with this woman and I love this woman. It's none of your business, and our relationship is none of your business."
Mm.
And he really stepped up. But it shocked me to know that some people were thinking that. And I
Mm.
wonder too, when I was with him, if there would be, or if there were, Asian guys looking at us thinking, why is she with that
Mm.
guy and not with someone like us, right? So
Mm.
I think race is very complex.
Yeah.
um, I honestly think you can be with whoever you want to be. If there's chemistry, if there's love, you can make it work.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
but
that's
yeah,
deep.
it is pretty. It can get pretty deep. Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned that exact comment. Honestly, like this is crazy to think I spent so much energy thinking that same exact thought that you just mentioned. Like I would say a good chunk of my life, I would be jealous of like these like white guys. I'd be like, oh yeah, Hollywood definitely is hooking them up with some good, like because I was like putting myself into like Asian females. shoes. Like if I see like like all these beautiful men through Hollywood in the movies, and if that's what I'm exposed to, like I'm gonna want that too, right? That's the narrative that's like given to us, right? These guys are like your knight in shining armors, are gonna save your day, like I get it, like even my wife, like there's plenty of folks like she's like, man, he's beautiful, right? I'm like thinking to myself, yeah, like if I watch 100 movies where these guys are like, with ripped abs and all this, and that's all I see, and like there's maybe 2 movies where there's Asian guys like representation, I would think the same thing. So yeah, I spent probably an unnecessarily large amount of time thinking about this the very thought that you just mentioned, and it's kind of sad, but now I kind of accept it, and I'm like, there's ways that I'm contributing, that trying to dispel these stereotypes and things like that.
Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned before, I think the media landscape is changing. There are a lot of really gorgeous, Asian American men in
Yeah, yeah,
television. Do we need more? Hell yes, but
yeah,
it's
it's
happening.
changing.
It's happening. But I also
Yeah.
think, aside from the people we see on television, it's also the writers of the story,
Mm,
the people behind, the directors, the
yeah,
creators behind those narratives. Because even if you
yeah,
do have front facing, multicultural or LGBTQ representation, but without those writers behind there who are also diverse, you're just kind of recycling a story through a lens of majority
yeah.
white lens.
Yeah, that's why I got into this podcasting stuff actually, because I was like, I don't know that many Asian podcasters. I listen to thousands of hours of podcasts. So I was like, let me switch it up. But I remember there was this one Filipino girl that started her own like podcast, and I discovered it, and I was like, I fell in love with everything that she was saying. She was so vulnerable, and she shared so openly, and that kind of like clicked. I was like, okay, like there needs to be more representation. So been helping a lot of my friends start their own podcasts as well, who are Filipino, Chinese, Korean. So that's been going really well.
That's cool. What's her name?
This is so bad that I forgot.
Oh
I
no.
know. I think I scared her a little bit because I was like fanboying, because like it was like early on in my career. So I was like, you changed my life. Like I love, like I wrote like a whole letter to her. So she's probably like, who is this guy?
Well, I'd love to know who that person is. I love to
Yeah.
support, API creators, and they're everywhere. There's this misconception that, especially with anti-Asian hate coming out up, or that the people think that only now are Asian Americans speaking up. Only now are there activists and creators. I disagree. There are creators like Jeff Yang, who's so outspoken, been outspoken.
Mm.
A lot of Kevin Nadal as well. A
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
amazing Asian American activists. Corky Lee, who sadly passed away. Um, there are a lot of Asian Americans who have been, to me, an inspiration or beacons of hope.
Mm.
And they've been there. They've
Mm.
existed even before the coronavirus, have been pushing our stories out front and center, and still fight and continue to fight. So if anything, I want the world to know that Asian American activism is still very strong. Representation
Mm.
is very strong. Now there's just more opportunities for people to listen and know
Yeah.
that they're there, they've been there. And we've been fighting the good fight alongside other minority Americans, and to
Mm.
fight for equal rights. So it's always been.
Yeah. I do think it's interesting how, and I think you probably feel the same way. Like when I do meet like Black and brown folks, or just any groups that are marginalized, like I feel an instant connection. Like for me, it's much easier to relate to any person of color. Like when I meet, like it seems like we all are willing to help each other out. And I just find that interesting, that it's just so much easier for me. And I naturally gravitate towards people of color. It's just weird, but at least I have the awareness now that maybe I'm unconsciously holding on to things. that isn't serving me,
I think that's interesting too. And I wonder, you know, I too, because we are people of color, we can relate to what it means to, experience racism and discrimination, or that weird look people would give you that is like, there's something behind that look or something behind that politeness. But I think I find it fascinating that there are still some Asian Americans who don't know that they're a person of color, who
Yeah, you're right.
perhaps,
Yeah.
yeah, who think that, you know, racism doesn't exist or doesn't affect them. And I think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
very troublesome because, you know, um, yeah, it's perhaps they're just not exposed. I don't know, but I think that is very, very troublesome.
Yeah, it's crazy you mentioned that. So my very own wife, like she says she never experienced like anything, like any sort until I guess more recently because of the hate crimes against older Asian people and just watching the news and stuff like that. But it blew my mind that she's like never experienced any of this. And I'm like, what? I'm like, is my whole life a lie? Like, like, I don't know. Like, it just blew my mind. I'm like, I thought everyone experiences this. But she was like, honestly, like I never like, yeah, until I met you, like I didn't know any of this stuff. I'm just like,
Wow.
whoa, like just mind blown. Yeah, it's
It's
crazy.
the subtleness though of it. Like when people ask you, where are you from? No, where are you really from? To try
Right.
to hone in your ethnicity, or getting you confused with another, Asian in
That's the
your
worst. Yeah.
company. Right. So like it's the subtle microaggressions, I think, that
Yeah.
exist. And, I guess maybe because I've been doing this for a while and
Yeah.
covering diversity issues, that I am a little bit more keen on it, but
Yeah.
it happens, and it happens so very subtly. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. From the corporate lens, just because I guess I'm in that community often, it's very, very obvious, right? When it's like lack of executive presence, I mean, just look around the boardroom, like you can tell
Yep.
usually, but a lot of times, like you said, it is more microaggressions, more subtle, where they'll just say like, oh, yeah, but it is something that we talk about pretty often in the business community as well. And I think it's starting to change. I think there's definitely more representation, but yeah, there's a ton of executives that always share the same thing. And sometimes they it's almost like they're just so used to it that they're numb to it. It's like a defense mechanism or survival mechanism. So they're just like, that's just how it is. That's just how it's always going to be.
Yeah. And wow, that could be debilitating in a way, to know that that's always how it's been and there's no way to change it. I would
Yeah.
like to think some of the CEOs might want to kind of shake things up a little bit. But yes, you're absolutely right in terms of CEOs, people in C-suites. It's hard. It's hard, or there are statistics that show a lack of diversity on that end, particularly women of color as well. So
Mhm.
yeah, more work still needs to be done for sure. But at the same time, as much as we're talking about being proud as Asian Americans, and all these things against us, I think it's also important to talk about, what can bring us together as a community, as an Asian American community, but like as human beings in general. There's a lot of, talk, particularly um, when the anti-Asian hate started coming about, about Black Americans against Asian Americans, like pitting
Mhm.
them against each other. And
Mhm.
I think there needs to be a conversation of, why is that even there, right? We're fighting the same battles. We're not necessarily the same, but we're still, our want and need for equality is there. We want the same goals to be treated equal. So there's
Mhm.
no point of fighting amongst each other when we can work together to topple, that racism or systemic racism that exists within our society.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think there's a bit of a scarcity context where it's like, well, if they get theirs, then we're not going to get ours. I think that's some people think that way. I mean, I've been guilty of it as well, where I see a lot of resources being spent for Black and brown folks in corporate, right? And I'm like, well, what about us? Like, are we not? Do we not also encounter like inequalities and stuff like that too? And then the reframe that a lot of people share with me, it's like, hey, they have more of a need than we do, right? So naturally, they're going to get more resources. So yeah, I've been guilty of that scarcity mindset as well, where I'm like, hey, like what's up, like what's going on, is anything going to happen, but I do understand it takes time, and like you said, like there's like the politics behind it and everything, and yeah, there's a lot of work. And
There's a lot of sounds, and I live in the
oh,
city, so it's so loud.
I hear it now, yeah.
Yeah, I think with that conversation of scarcity, um, I honestly think, because people say that all the time, like as if there's not enough room in like on the table, right? But I feel
Yeah.
like there is room for everyone in a way, or we can create room or make room.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think this idea of scarcity um, just it separates us as opposed to connects us together.
Mm.
And I feel like it's that idea of pitting minority groups against minority groups, thinking that there is this scarcity issue, that only one minority group gets to be on top, right?
Mm.
But that's not necessarily true. I feel
Yeah.
like that is a creation, and this is all my opinion, but that is a creation of the system that built this based on like this economic I don't even know if I'm even saying this right, but it's a system that is created to keep the people on top by
Mhm.
having the people on the bottom fight off each other.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
make that mean a whole bunch of things. It could be race, it could be economics, but it is just to keep people in line so they don't topple the system. If you keep
Mhm.
them fighting at the bottom, bickering over scraps, they're not gonna fight to topple down the people on top who are eating steak.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah.
so I don't know. I think there's this idea that we can have this conversation about, you know, creating some sort of better system than we have now. I know I'm speaking
Mm.
in very loose terminology, but I'm sure there's some practical ways to
I'm curious, have you ever watched the Twilight Zone, the new one? The new,
No, I haven't.
it's really good. It's a way of, I mean, they certainly exaggerate a lot of these concepts that we talk about around race and gender equality and like even things like mansplaining and things like that, and like the immigrant issue and stuff like that. But it's done in a way that like really has it like present, like, and he, I think that's like the beauty of like some content that really has you think like, wow, like there's certainly, yeah, I would recommend it if you haven't checked it out yet. Twilight Zone, the new one with the guy from Key and Peele. What's his name? You know who we're talking about?
Yes, I do know. Yeah.
Yeah.
I will definitely check it out for sure.
Yeah. And I also want to acknowledge that there are really good allies. Like there are a lot of white men and women that are really like supporting. There's so I just want to acknowledge that too, because I've definitely have fallen into the trap of like, I feel like kind of printing a pretty broad brush across like all white people and stuff like that too. And just reflecting back on my journey, I know there's plenty of like white allies that have really been curious and been taking action and educating themselves and just providing space and providing these areas of opportunity for mentorship and guidance and trying to bring people back up on the elevator with them as well.
I agree. I agree with that, and acknowledge the fact that there are white allies that exist, but at the same time, put it in a context where if there is a movement like Black Lives Matter or APIs speaking against anti-Asian hate, that even though there are white allies, that they leave room for the actual community to speak up. Because so often we are unheard, and it it diminishes the voices of the people actually experiencing that racism or that injustice, to not have them be this speaker or be that mouthpiece. So yes, I think white allies are amazing, but also I want to say that they should, in my opinion, also leave room to let the community's voices, let them speak, to speaking on behalf of them, right? Because if that completely destroys the movement.
I'm curious your thoughts on white fragility. Have you Robin DiAngelo, I think her name is. Are you familiar with that?
I am familiar with it, but what is your question? I mean, I'm familiar with it. I haven't read the book.
Okay.
But what?
Yeah. So my reason why I brought that up was it broke my heart that she was trying to create a space where white people can have more like take responsibility and be like, hey, there's this thing that you don't even know that exists. And in a corporate sense, like when I was working at LinkedIn Learning, I don't work there anymore, but there was so much backlash from so much business leaders because they basically people took snippets of it and there was this whole media mash. But anyways, essentially, it's just sad when people are really trying to create the space and trying to like create this awareness, and then it just all comes crashing down and stuff like that. Like definitely it hurts to see that when people try to do all these amazing things, that there's just always a lot of push and pull that happens.
I think it's a lot of, when it comes to race, or actually a lot of race, I think there's a lot of gray areas, and it's not, I mean, it's, first of all, it's a very difficult conversation to have. And especially, I feel like it's a very difficult conversation to have as a white person who doesn't necessarily like experience racism.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I haven't read the books. I don't know really what to say other than, when it comes to the issue of race, that it's important for communities to be the one front and center, and that white allies are there to be a listening ear, to be the support system, or also help those communities speak up, but help create that space. And and I forget the name of this book, but my brother-in-law, who's white, read a book, and I'm forgetting it now, I'll probably text it to you later, but he read this book where it opened his eyes as a white man to realize what racism meant, what sexism meant as well, because it was written by a white woman in a terms that he could understand, right? So it was something that he couldn't understand because he wasn't a person of color, but because this woman told it in a way where she experienced sexism and used that as a way to open up conversations of race, then he understood and had an amazing conversation about racism with me. And I feel like, if white allies are able to open up conversations about race to begin with, I think it's amazing. It's great to encourage that, because we cannot win this. We cannot have equality without white allies.
Mhm.
We cannot have equality without our brothers and sisters, in the Black community, Latinx, Native American. I'm sure I'm missing more, LGBTQ. We cannot have that conversation if one of us, one of our groups, is still being treated unequally,
Mhm.
right? So it's either all or nothing.
Yeah.
In my book, anyway, it's all or nothing.
No, I appreciate that. And I know you have to go soon, so we'll wrap it up. But yeah, I think that's what had me like the switch flipped on, because I attended women at LinkedIn events, and then after hearing women speak about the injustices, I'm like, oh, it's like how I feel like as an Asian, and that like I had a light bulb moment. I'm like, oh, now I get it, because before I didn't get it because I'm a guy, right? So how would I know what that's like? And then after hearing so many stories of like they're like, oh yeah, I was the only woman, for this management consulting job, or and the only woman manager, female manager, and all this. I was like, this sounds a lot like what it feels like to be like Asian in a client facing role. I'm usually the only Asian in client revenue generating goals. Roles. And then that kind of like, I was like, oh, now I get it. So yeah, to go back to your point, like sometimes you have to hear it from to like truly get it.
Mhm.
But yeah, I appreciate you, Kat. This has been amazing. I just want to acknowledge you for the amazing work that you do, and just the light that you're being in the world, and the stand that you're being for equality. It's a beautiful thing, and I look forward to supporting you and seeing what you continue to create.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited for you too because you're doing team. So I'm super stoked about what you're going to get. And I really appreciate you just having this conversation with me and putting this
Yeah.
podcast out. I know you're just doing it because you want to do it and get more voices out there, but I think it's important, you're just completely motivated to do it. So,
Mm.
well, Matt, appreciate it. And to the listeners as well, thank you for listening in.
Thank you, Kat.
Thank you.